The announcement appeared in the Times on a Tuesday morning in April of 1882. Its placement among the society pages suggesting importance that its brevity belied. Lord Sebastian Harcourt, Duke of Ashworth, was pleased to announce his engagement to Lady Clarissa Pemberton, daughter of the Earl of Westbrook. The wedding would take place in June at St. George's, Hanover Square. All of London's finest families were expected to attend. Miss Amelia Blackwood read this announcement at the breakfast table of the modest townhouse she shared with her widowed mother in an unfashionable corner of Bloomsbury. Her tea grew cold in its cup. Her toast remained untouched on its plate. Her hands did not tremble because she had taught herself years ago that trembling accomplished nothing except to reveal weakness better concealed. She had been expecting this. Not specifically, not Lady Clarissa whose acquaintance she had never made, but something like this. Some society beauty whose pedigree matched Sebastian's own. Some diamond of the first water whose presence on his arm would confirm what Amelia had always understood about the vast distance separating a duke from a physician's daughter. Understanding, however, proved insufficient protection against pain. She excused herself from the table before her mother could observe the composure she was struggling to maintain. Her chambers offered privacy that public rooms could not provide. She sat on the bed where she had lain awake countless nights imagining futures that would never materialize, and she permitted herself precisely 5 minutes of grief. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her spine, and began the process of forgetting Sebastian Harcourt. Their acquaintance had commenced 18 months prior, at a lecture on archaeological discoveries in Egypt that Amelia had attended with her father during the final months before consumption claimed him. Sebastian had been present for reasons that remained unclear, a duke among scholars whose company he seemed to genuinely enjoy rather than merely tolerate. They had spoken during the interval, discovering shared enthusiasm for antiquities that their different stations might have suggested impossible. He had asked questions that revealed genuine interest rather than polite performance. She had answered with intelligence she saw no reason to conceal despite the conventions suggesting feminine learning should be hidden. He had called on her the following week, and the week after that, and every week for 6 months, until her father's death had interrupted social interactions whose propriety her mother increasingly questioned. The mourning period had provided convenient excuse for reduced contact, though letters had continued arriving with regularity that suggested Sebastian's interest survived temporary separation. These letters had discussed books and discoveries and ideas whose exploration required intellectual partnership that his social circle apparently could not provide. They had not discussed love. They had not acknowledged the attachment that was obviously developing between them. They had maintained fiction that their connection was purely intellectual, a meeting of minds that transcended the romantic entanglements complicating lesser relationships. Amelia had believed this fiction. She had told herself that Sebastian valued her thoughts rather than her person, that their friendship could persist regardless of whatever marriage his station would eventually require. She had been a fool. The letters had ceased 3 months ago without explanation. Her inquiries had received no response. The connection she had treasured had simply evaporated, leaving nothing except questions whose answers this morning's announcement finally provided. He had been courting Lady Clarissa while corresponding with her. He had been building toward respectable marriage while entertaining himself with inappropriate friendship. He had used her as intellectual companion while reserving his actual commitment for someone whose birth merited serious consideration. She had been diversion, nothing more. The wedding occurred in June as scheduled, covered extensively by newspapers whose society columns Amelia had learned to avoid. Lady Clarissa was described as radiant. The Duke appeared proud. The reception at Ashworth House had attracted everyone who mattered in English aristocratic society. Amelia read none of these accounts directly. She learned of them through her mother, who consumed society news with appetite that her daughter's reduced circumstances had not diminished. Life continued despite Heartbreak's conviction that continuation was impossible. Amelia secured employment as governess to the daughters of a wealthy manufacturer whose fortune derived from textile mills in Manchester. The position offered respectable independence that her father's death had made necessary, residence in a household whose northern location placed considerable distance between herself and London's constant reminders of what she had lost. She taught French and Italian and music to girls whose futures would be determined by the marriages their father's money could purchase. She observed, from the margins of their social occasions, the mechanisms by which aristocratic England perpetuated itself through strategic unions that had nothing to do with love. She thought about Sebastian less frequently, as months accumulated into years. She did not think about him at all, eventually. Or so she told herself. The letter arrived 4 years after the wedding, forwarded through channels whose complexity suggested the sender had invested considerable effort in locating her. The handwriting was unfamiliar, feminine, elegant in ways that suggested education exceeding what most women received. The signature at the bottom belonged to Lady Clarissa Harcourt, Duchess of Ashworth. Amelia nearly discarded the letter unread. What communication could Sebastian's wife possibly have that she would want to receive? What purpose could connection with that household serve except to reopen wounds that had finally, painstakingly healed? Curiosity, however, proved stronger than caution. The letter's contents defied every expectation. Lady Clarissa wrote that she was dying. Consumption, the same disease that had claimed Amelia's father, had established residence in her lungs and would complete its work within months. She had made peace with this fate, she claimed, and wrote now not seeking sympathy, but offering information that Amelia deserved to possess. Sebastian spoke of you constantly during our engagement. He spoke of you still, during the early months of our marriage, until I demanded he cease mentioning the woman he had abandoned to marry me. I understood from the beginning that I was not his choice. I was his obligation. His family required alliance with mine for reasons involving debts and political connections that I never fully comprehended. He was not given options regarding our union. I hated you for years without ever meeting you. I hated the shadow you cast over a marriage I had entered believing might eventually produce genuine affection. I hated that my husband loved someone he could not have while remaining entirely unable to love someone he possessed. But hatred exhausts itself when death approaches. I find myself now wanting to correct injustices while correction remains possible. Sebastian did not choose another woman over you. Sebastian was forced to choose between family destruction and personal happiness. He chose as duty demanded. He has been miserable ever since. This is not your concern, I understand, but it seemed information you deserve to possess, whatever you choose to do with it. I am sorry for whatever pain our marriage caused you. I am sorry for the pain it caused him. I am sorry that circumstances created suffering for everyone involved while benefiting no one in any meaningful sense. Please do not respond to this letter. I have no wish to correspond further. I have discharged the obligation my conscience demanded. What follows is none of my affair. Lady Clarissa Harcourt. Amelia read this letter 7 times before its implications fully penetrated understanding that resisted revision. Sebastian had not chosen Lady Clarissa. Sebastian had been compelled. The abandonment that had seemed deliberate rejection had been nothing of the sort. This knowledge changed nothing practically. Sebastian was married. She was employed in a distant city, building a life that did not include him. Whatever feelings had existed between them belonged to a past that could not be resurrected. But it changed something internally. The narrative she had constructed to explain her heartbreak had proven false. The villain she had imagined had been victim of circumstances exceeding his control. The rejection she had felt as personal judgment had been nothing personal at all. She did not respond, as Lady Clarissa had requested. She did, however, begin following society news with attention she had previously avoided. Lady Clarissa died in September, her passing announced with the elaborate mourning that duchesses received regardless of whether genuine grief accompanied official observances. Sebastian was described as devastated, though Amelia now understood this devastation differently than society pages intended. He was free. The thought arrived unbidden and was immediately suppressed. What did his freedom matter? 4 years had passed. He had made no effort to contact her despite, apparently, caring enough that his wife had resented her existence throughout their marriage. If he had wanted to find her, he would have found her. His failure to do so communicated everything necessary about whatever attachment had once existed. She resumed her employment with renewed determination to construct satisfaction from materials that did not include Sebastian Harcourt. 3 months after Lady Clarissa's death, Sebastian appeared in Manchester. Amelia learned of his arrival through household gossip that penetrated even the nursery where she spent most of her hours. The Duke of Ashworth was visiting Mr. Thornton, her employer, regarding some business matter that servants speculated about without comprehending. His Grace would be dining with the family that evening. Governesses did not dine with families entertaining aristocratic guests. Amelia would remain safely invisible in her quarters, her presence in the household undetected by visitors whose notice she had no desire to attract. This plan dissolved when Mr. Thornton summoned her to the library before dinner. "The Duke has requested your presence at table tonight." Mr. Thornton informed her with confusion that suggested he found this request inexplicable. "Apparently you are acquainted." The dinner that followed constituted the most uncomfortable meal of Amelia's existence. She wore her best dress, a dark green silk that had been purchased for a different occasion entirely and had hung unworn in her wardrobe for years. She arranged her hair with care that exceeded her usual practical approach. She descended to the dining room with composure that her trembling hands contradicted. Sebastian stood when she entered. His appearance had changed in ways that 4 years made inevitable. Gray had appeared at his temples. Lines had established themselves around eyes whose darkness she remembered too vividly. He looked older, wearier, marked by experiences whose weight she could only imagine. He looked at her as though she were the first thing worth seeing he had encountered in years. The dinner conversation maintained appropriate superficiality, topics ranging from business prospects to political developments to the weather that Manchester provided in abundance. Amelia contributed minimally, uncertain what role she was expected to perform in this unexpected reunion. Sebastian's attention remained fixed on her throughout the meal despite topics that should have engaged him elsewhere. After dinner, while Mrs. Thornton entertained the other guests in the drawing room, Sebastian requested private conversation with Miss Blackwood. Mr. Thornton granted this request with the accommodating uncertainty of a man who understood that dukes received whatever they requested regardless of propriety's objections. They walked in the garden, darkness providing privacy that daylight would have denied. "I received a letter from Clarissa before she died," Sebastian began. "She informed me that she had written to you, that she had explained circumstances I should have explained myself years ago. She wrote that your marriage was not chosen," Amelia confirmed. "It was not. My family's situation required alliance with the Pembertons. Debts accumulated across generations had reached crisis that only their resources could address. I was informed that refusal would result in consequences affecting not just myself, but cousins, aunts, servants whose employment depended on estates that would otherwise be lost. And you could not tell me this at the time." I could barely acknowledge it to myself. I convinced myself that marrying Clarissa was the honorable course, that abandoning responsibility for personal happiness was selfish rather than sensible. I convinced myself that you would recover from disappointment more easily than my family would recover from destruction. Sebastian paused, seeming to gather courage for what followed. "I was wrong about everything. Clarissa was miserable throughout our marriage because she understood that I had given her my name but not my heart. My family's situation stabilized temporarily but ultimately deteriorated anyway through circumstances no marriage could have prevented. The sacrifice I made accomplished nothing except to create suffering for everyone involved. What do you want from me, Sebastian?" The question emerged sharper than she had intended, years of suppressed hurt finding voice despite her efforts at control. "I want your forgiveness. I want the opportunity to explain myself, which I have now taken. And I want, if such a thing remains possible, the chance to earn what I was too cowardly to fight for when fighting might have mattered." Amelia absorbed this declaration, in silence that extended uncomfortably. 4 years have passed. I have built a life that does not include you. I have learned to be content without the attachment I once believed essential to my happiness. You cannot simply appear and expect that everything I have constructed will dissolve because you have decided you want what you previously discarded. I discarded nothing. I was forced to relinquish what I valued most to preserve what I was told mattered more. The distinction may seem insignificant from your perspective, but it has consumed me for 4 years of marriage to a woman who deserved better than the husband I proved capable of being. Did you love her, even a little? I respected her. I was grateful for her patience with circumstances that were not her fault. I mourned her death genuinely, both for the person she was and for the suffering her life had contained. But love, the kind of love that makes other considerations irrelevant, that I have only ever felt for one woman. His meaning was unmistakable. Amelia turned away, watching moonlight silver the garden paths rather than meeting eyes whose intensity she could not comfortably sustain. I do not know if I can give you what you are asking for, she said finally. The woman who loved you 4 years ago has been replaced by someone different. Someone who learned to survive disappointment by eliminating the expectations that disappointment requires. I am not certain that woman is capable of loving again. Not you, not anyone. Then let me earn her capability. Let me demonstrate through action what words cannot adequately convey. Let me prove that the man who failed you is not the man I choose to remain. She considered this proposal as autumn wind scattered leaves across paths that servants would clear tomorrow. The sensible response was refusal. The practical response was protecting herself from further heartbreak by declining involvement with someone who had already demonstrated capacity for abandonment. The rational response was returning to her employment, her independence, her carefully constructed contentment. She did not give the sensible response. You may call on me, she said. You may write. You may attempt to demonstrate whatever you believe requires demonstration. But I promise nothing. I guarantee nothing. I reserve the right to send you away at any point if this pursuit proves unwelcome, or if your behavior suggests that the changes you claim remain superficial rather than genuine. Sebastian's face illuminated with hope that 4 years of misery had apparently not extinguished. That is more than I deserve, and exactly what I hoped you might offer. The courtship that followed bore no resemblance to their initial acquaintance. Sebastian did not maintain polite distance or intellectual pretense. He pursued her with determination that announced his intentions to anyone observing. He visited Manchester so frequently that local society began speculating about which industrial investment required such persistent attention. He wrote daily, letters that discussed not just books and ideas, but feelings he had previously concealed behind scholarship's safer territory. He told her about his marriage, the loneliness of sharing life with someone who knew she occupied second position in his affections, the guilt of being unable to provide what Clarissa deserved despite genuine efforts to manufacture emotion that would not come, the relief when death ended a union that had been mistake from its inception, and the shame that relief generated in someone who should have felt only grief. He told her about his family's situation, which had not improved despite the sacrifice he had made. His brother's gambling had consumed whatever the Pemberton alliance had temporarily provided. His cousins had scattered to various colonial positions whose distance reduced their claims on resources that no longer existed. The estates he had inherited were mortgaged beyond recovery. He was not wealthy anymore, not in the sense that dukes were supposed to be wealthy. He retained title and properties, but little of the income that made such possessions meaningful. This confession seemed designed to test whether her interest was genuine or mercenary. Amelia found herself strangely moved by his reduced circumstances. She had never wanted his wealth. She had wanted him, the person whose mind had engaged hers during those lectures and letters and conversations that had filled months before duty had torn them apart. His poverty, if poverty was even the appropriate term for someone who still possessed more than most Englishmen would see in their lifetimes, did not diminish what she had valued. It made him, somehow, more accessible, more real, more capable of being loved without the complications that extreme disparity would have created. Their engagement was announced in the spring of 1887, exactly 5 years after the announcement that had broken her heart. The society pages noted the peculiarity of a duke selecting a governess, though speculation attributed this choice to romantic eccentricity rather than the genuine connection that actually explained it. Amelia received letters from acquaintances she had not heard from in years, congratulations whose sincerity varied based on the writer's proximity to Sebastian's former social circle. Lady Clarissa's family expressed outrage through channels that reached Amelia indirectly. The Pembertons considered this engagement an insult to their daughter's memory, a replacement effected with unseemly haste, a confirmation of everything they had suspected about the Duke's failure to properly value the wife they had provided him. Sebastian addressed these objections by ignoring them entirely. He had spent 4 years performing obligations that others had defined. He had sacrificed his happiness on altars that others had constructed. He was finished consulting external opinions about decisions that affected primarily himself. The wedding occurred in September, at a small church in the countryside, whose obscurity protected them from the spectacle that a London ceremony would have generated. Amelia's mother attended, her happiness at seeing her daughter settled tempering whatever reservations she might have harbored about the peculiar path that had led to this outcome. A handful of Sebastian's remaining allies attended, those whose loyalty had survived his family's decline, and whose presence demonstrated friendship uncontaminated by calculation. No Pembertons appeared, no society figures whose attendance would have conferred legitimacy, no photographers from newspapers whose readers consumed aristocratic ceremonies as entertainment. It was, both bride and groom agreed, exactly what they wanted. The years that followed required adjustments that neither had fully anticipated. Sebastian's estates demanded attention that his previous lifestyle had not encouraged him to provide. He learned agriculture from tenants whose expertise exceeded his own. He discovered that managing diminished resources required intelligence that managing abundance had never demanded. He became, somewhat to his surprise, a competent landowner whose efforts gradually reversed the decline that generations of neglect had accelerated. Amelia brought skills from her years as governess that proved unexpectedly valuable. She managed household accounts with efficiency that reduced expenses without sacrificing comfort. She organized staff whose loyalty she earned through treatment that previous employers had not provided. She created from the remnants of aristocratic grandeur something that felt less like museum and more like home. They produced 3 children whose existence transformed both their parents in ways that intellectual partnership had not predicted. 2 daughters and a son, each born in the same chambers where generations of Harcourts had entered the world, each greeted with joy that erased whatever sorrows had preceded their arrival. Sebastian proved a devoted father in ways that his own upbringing had not prepared him to be. He played with his children rather than relegating them to nurseries. He discussed their questions seriously rather than dismissing them as childish. He demonstrated through daily action that family could be built on love rather than merely obligation. Amelia watched this transformation with satisfaction that exceeded what she had imagined possible during those dark months, when his marriage to another woman had seemed to close every door that mattered. She had constructed happiness from materials that had seemed insufficient. She had been wrong about their insufficiency. The night of their 20th anniversary, they sat together in the library that had witnessed so many of their conversations across decades of partnership. The fire crackled. The children slept in chambers above. The estate that had nearly been lost now thrived under management that combined his title with her practicality. "Do you ever wonder," Sebastian asked, "what might have happened if I had refused my family's demands? If I had chosen you instead of Clarissa from the beginning?" Amelia considered the question with attention it deserved. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wonder whether we would have been happy without the intervening years that taught us what happiness actually required. I wonder whether your family's destruction would have haunted a marriage that had precipitated it. I wonder whether we would have taken each other for granted if we had never experienced what losing each other felt like." She turned to face him, taking hands that had grown familiar across years of contact. But I conclude, each time I wonder, that speculation serves no purpose. We arrived here through paths that wound more than we would have chosen. We built this life from ruins that your previous marriage created and from strength that my years alone developed. What exists between us now was forged through difficulty that easier circumstances might not have produced. You are saying that suffering was necessary. I am saying that suffering was what happened. Whether it was necessary remains unknowable. What I know with certainty is that I love you, have loved you, will love you for whatever years remain to us. The path matters less than the destination, and this destination satisfies me completely. Sebastian raised her hands to his lips, pressing kisses against fingers that bore marks of work she had never expected a duchess to perform. He chose another woman once. He had lost everything because of that choice. But from loss had come recovery. From ending had come beginning. From the worst mistake of his life had come, eventually, the greatest happiness he had ever known. The story did not end, as anyone had predicted. It ended better. And so I ask you, dear audience, how do you feel about Sebastian and Amelia's journey? Did Sebastian deserve the second chance that fate eventually provided, or should Amelia have refused his pursuit when he finally returned? What are your thoughts on Lady Clarissa's letter, that final act of honesty from a dying woman who had spent years resenting a rival she had never met? Does suffering truly forge stronger bonds, as Amelia suggested, or is that merely consolation we offer ourselves when paths prove more difficult than anticipated? I would love to hear your reflections on the story of loss and recovery, of choices made under pressure and consequences endured across years. Share your thoughts, your feelings, your own experiences with loves lost and found. Stories live through the conversations they generate, and this one awaits your voice to continue its journey.